He slid the ring box across the restaurant table without looking at her. Not a proposal, a return. Keep it, Ryan Whitmore said, already reaching for his jacket. Or sell it, I don't care. He straightened his cuffs. Those expensive silver cufflinks she'd saved 3 paychecks to buy him last Christmas, and finally met her eyes. No guilt, no apology. Just the clean, efficient look of a man closing a file. I'm marrying Vanessa Harrington on this 14th. The announcement goes out tomorrow morning, so... He stood. I thought you deserved to hear it from me first. Evelyn Carter did not cry. She wanted to. Her throat was doing that terrible tightening thing, and her hands had gone completely cold, but she did not cry. She just stared at the ring box sitting between the bread basket and her untouched water glass, and she thought, 4 years. 4 years, and he slid it across the table like a receipt. If you've ever been discarded by someone who once promised you forever, if you've ever sat alone in a restaurant booth while the world kept moving around you like nothing happened, then you already know exactly what Evelyn felt in that moment. The question is, what would you have done next? If this story already has your heart pounding, you're in the right place. Hit that like button right now and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens when a woman with nothing left to lose walks straight into the most dangerous arms in Chicago. This one goes all the way to the end, and trust me, you do not want to blink. The bread basket was sourdough. Evelyn remembered that detail later with a strange, almost clinical clarity, the way the mind latches onto something small and irrelevant when the large thing is too enormous to process. Sourdough in a little linen-lined basket, still warm, and she had been looking forward to it all afternoon because she'd skipped lunch for a client meeting that ran 3 hours. Ryan had chosen the restaurant. He always chose the restaurant. She'd worn the blue dress. The one he'd once told her made her look like someone who belonged somewhere important. She'd gotten her hair done at lunch, shelled out $40 she didn't really have, because she'd thought, for some stupid reason, that tonight might be the night. 4 years together. A ring she'd spotted on his dresser 3 weeks ago that she'd pretended not to see because she didn't want to ruin the surprise. There was no surprise. There was just a box being pushed across white linen and a man already checking the time on his phone. Ryan. Her voice came out steadier than it had any right to be. You bought a ring. I bought it a long time ago. He said it like that was an explanation. Things changed. Things changed, she repeated. Evelyn. Now he did look slightly uncomfortable, which was the closest thing to remorse she was going to get. You knew we wanted different things. You always said your work came first. The hours, the cases. I need someone who can actually be present for the kind of life I'm building. The kind of life. She looked at him. Really looked. She'd loved this face for 4 years. The sharp jaw, the careful hair, the eyes that could be warm when he wanted something, and cool when he'd already gotten it. She was seeing the cool version now. You mean the Harrington kind. He didn't deny it. That was the thing about Ryan Whitmore. He was a corporate lawyer. He never said anything he could be held accountable for later. Her father's firm is one of the most powerful in the country, he said. This is a career opportunity as much as anything else. A career opportunity, Evelyn said. Your marriage. People make practical decisions. That's not a crime. She almost laughed. She was a legal aid attorney. She spent her days fighting for people who got crushed by practical decisions made by people with more power than conscience. And here was the man she'd loved telling her that trading her in for a billionaire's daughter was simply practical. 4 years, she said quietly, were good years. He said it briskly, like he was writing a performance review. I'm not pretending they weren't, but I have to be honest with you. Now you want to be honest. Evelyn, you practiced this. She heard it in her own voice, not anger yet, something quieter and more devastating than anger. You practiced exactly what to say, the cufflinks. She nodded at his wrists. You put on the cufflinks I gave you. Something shifted in his face. Not guilt. Ryan Whitmore did not do guilt, but something like the faint discomfort of a man who has been caught being slightly more calculating than even he thought acceptable. I should go, he said. Yes. She looked back at the ring box. You should. He left $40 on the table for a dinner neither of them had eaten. She stared at it for a long time after he walked out. The way the bill sat there with its crisp edges, his final gesture of consideration. the absolute last thing Ryan Whitmore would ever do for her. And then she put it in her purse, left the ring box exactly where it was, and walked out into the November cold without her coat because she'd hung it on the back of her chair and forgot it, and she wasn't going back. The wind off Lake Michigan hit her like a hand to the face. She stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant and breathed. Just breathed. People moved around her. Couples, families, a group of laughing women in party dresses who jostled past without seeing her. And Evelyn Carter stood very still in the middle of all of it and tried to figure out what a person was supposed to do when the last 4 years of their life had just been filed away under practical decisions. She didn't have an answer. She started walking anyway. She walked for almost 2 hours. This was not unusual for Evelyn. When her caseload got unbearable, and it always got unbearable, because she'd taken a legal aid position in one of the most underfunded offices in Cook County, which meant her client list was perpetually 60 people deep, and her salary was a number she didn't discuss at dinner parties. She walked. It cleared something out. She'd learned it from her mother, a woman who'd raised Evelyn alone on a schoolteacher's salary, and who used to say that the only things worth keeping were the things you'd carry on your own 2 feet. Her mother would have hated Ryan Whitmore. Evelyn had known this for approximately 2.5 years, and had filed that knowledge in the same drawer as the ring she'd spotted on his dresser. She ended up in the South Loop without quite meaning to, pushed along by the wind and her own unwillingness to go back to the apartment that still had his coffee mug on her counter, his dry cleaning ticket on her refrigerator, his ghost in every ordinary corner. The streets were quieter here, the restaurant smaller and warmer looking. She stopped in front of a place called Ardmore, a jazz bar she'd passed 100 times but never entered, the kind of place with amber light spilling through the windows and a piano audible from the sidewalk, not loud but present, the way a heartbeat is present. She went in because it was cold and she'd left her coat. That was it. That was the whole reason. She was not the kind of woman who wandered into jazz bars alone on a Tuesday night. She was the kind of woman who ate leftovers over the sink and read case files until midnight. But it was cold, and she had nowhere to be, and the music was doing something she couldn't name, pulling at the sore place under her sternum, and so she pushed open the door. The bar was half full and warm. A quartet was playing something slow and aching in the corner, the kind of jazz that doesn't ask you to be happy, just present. Evelyn found a seat at the far end of the bar, ordered a whiskey she couldn't really afford, and sat with both hands wrapped around the glass and tried not to think about the word practical. She failed at not thinking about it. She was on her second whiskey when she noticed the man 2 seats down. She noticed him the way you notice a change in air pressure, not visually, not at first, but as a shift in the atmosphere around you. He was large, dark-suited, with the kind of stillness that wasn't relaxed but controlled, the kind of person develops when they've spent a long time making sure nothing shows on their face. He was maybe mid-30s, dark hair, jaw that hadn't seen a razor in 2 days, eyes that were fixed on his own drink with the focused inattention of someone actively not thinking about something. He looked, Evelyn thought, like a man who'd also had a terrible evening. She wasn't going to say anything. She was absolutely not going to say anything. She was a woman alone at a bar who had just had her heart filed away like a tax document, and the last thing she needed was conversation with a stranger. "You're holding that glass like it owes you money," he said. She looked up. He wasn't looking at her, still looking at his own drink, but there was something at the corner of his mouth that might have been the ghost of a wry expression. "So are you," she said. Now he looked over. His eyes were darker than she'd expected, and sharper. The eyes of someone who assessed things quickly and rarely got it wrong. He looked at her for exactly 1 second longer than a polite stranger would. "Fair," he said. They didn't speak again for several minutes. The quartet moved into something slower. Evelyn finished her whiskey and contemplated a third, which was 2 more than she normally drank and would definitely result in a headache for her 7 a.m. client meeting, and she was in the middle of this very responsible internal debate when the man 2 seats down said, without preamble, "She left me for a politician." Evelyn turned. He was still looking at his drink. His jaw was tight in a way that suggested the words cost him something. "My ex," he said. "She told me my reputation would never get her the kind of life she wanted, that she needed a man with influence, political influence, that my world—" He stopped, set his glass down. "That my world wasn't something she could build a future on."
Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Mine left me for money, she said. Or, not just money, the Harrington family. He's a lawyer. Said it was a career opportunity.
Something in the man's expression shifted fractionally. Whitmore? She stared. Ryan Whitmore, you know him? He turned on his stool to face her fully, and now she could see that whatever she'd read as wry in his expression was something more complicated than that. Recognition, something unpleasant and almost darkly amused. Vanessa Harrington. He said the name like you'd say the name of a weather system. Not personal, not anymore, just a fact with consequences. She was with me for 14 months, left 6 weeks ago. His eyes held hers. Apparently the man she left me for is a corporate lawyer. The bar kept playing its slow music. A couple near the window laughed at something. The bartender refilled someone's glass at the other end. Evelyn Carter and the man 2 seats down sat in the amber light of the Ardmore Jazz Bar and looked at each other with the specific, terrible recognition of 2 people who have just discovered they were traded for each other. I'm Evelyn, she said finally. Damian, he said. He didn't offer her a last name. She didn't ask. There was something about the way he held himself, about the way the bartender had refilled his glass without being asked, about the 2 men in good suits near the door who were doing an extremely professional job of not appearing to watch him, that suggested a last name might come with information she wasn't sure she was ready for. What do you do? She asked instead. He looked at her for a moment. Business, he said. You? Legal aid attorney. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite surprise. You fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I try to. And he left you for the Harrington money. And she left you for a man with political cover. She picked up her empty glass, set it down. We were both auditioned and found insufficient. Insufficient. He repeated the word like he was testing its weight. Then quietly, I built everything I have from nothing. My father had nothing. His father had nothing. I turned that nothing into... He stopped himself. His hand around his glass was tense. Insufficient. He told me it was a career opportunity, Evelyn said. His marriage. He used those words, to my face. She told me my world wasn't something she could build a future on. A muscle in his jaw. While wearing the bracelet I bought her. They were quiet again. The music stretched out between them, doing what good music does. Holding the things that don't have words yet. I want them to understand, Damian said. He wasn't looking at her now. His voice was level, almost thoughtful, like a man working through a problem. What they gave up. I want Vanessa to see that discarding me was the worst decision she'll ever make. Not because I want her back. He said that part carefully, precisely. I don't. I want her to know she was wrong. I want the same thing, Evelyn said. And she did. She could feel it sitting low and solid in her chest, below the grief, heavier than the grief, something with teeth. I don't want Ryan back. I want him to see what he dismissed. I want Vanessa Harrington to know that the man she handed to me was already... She stopped, frowned at her own sentence. I don't know what I'm saying. You're saying you want the last word, Damian said, without having to say anything. She looked at him. He turned to face her completely. His expression was still controlled, still unreadable in the way that suggested years of practice. But there was something underneath it. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the precondition of warmth. Attention. The real kind. They ended up together, he said. Ryan Whitmore and Vanessa Harrington, which means they'll be seen together. At events, fundraisers, social functions, the kind of circles where image is everything. He paused. You and I were both discarded. We showed up in the same bar on the same night with the same reason for drinking. Another pause. That seems like it should mean something. Evelyn studied him carefully. What are you suggesting? Damian Blackwood, because that was his name, and she would learn it within 48 hours along with everything it carried. Set his glass down and looked at her with the careful, measured directness of a man who said exactly what he meant and expected the same in return. A contract, he said. She didn't move. 6 months, he said. We appear together. We are seen together. At every event they attend, every function, every social occasion where Chicago's elite circle overlaps. You become, he chose his words precisely, the woman beside me.
And I become the reason Ryan Whitmore spends the next 6 months understanding what he walked away from. His eyes didn't waver. We give them a front row seat to everything they told us we weren't worth. And at the end of 6 months, we walk away. Clean, no debts, no complications. You're describing a fake relationship, Evelyn said. I'm describing a business arrangement. A fractional pause. With the architecture of a relationship. She should have said no. She was a legal aid attorney who believed in the law, in honesty, in the grindingly slow work of genuine justice, not in theatrical revenge plots cooked up over whiskey by two people with wounded pride and, in at least one of their cases, almost certainly more going on than business. She should have said no. What's in it for you? She asked instead. Specifically, Vanessa left because she thought I wasn't enough. Too dangerous. Not legitimate enough. Not the kind of man who walks into a room and owns it without anyone being afraid. His voice was even, but something underneath it was not. I want her to understand that there is an entire category of woman, accomplished, principled, real, who looks at what I am and chooses to stay. He looked at Evelyn directly. You would not be performing. You would simply be present. And you would make sure Ryan sees me. Every time he enters a room. Evelyn Carter sat with that for a long moment. The pianist moved into a new melody, something with more motion to it, something that felt less like mourning and more like the moment before a decision. 4 years. A ring box pushed across a table like a receipt, practical decisions. I want it in writing, she said. Damian's expression shifted, and there it was. Not the ghost of a wry expression this time, but the real thing. Brief and unexpected and gone before she could be sure she'd seen it. Of course, he said. Full terms. Duration, expectations, exit conditions, everything. I have a lawyer. I am a lawyer. That landed. He looked at her with something that might, in a different light and with slightly different phrasing, have been respect. Then you'll draft it, he said. Yes, she said, I will. Outside, Chicago kept moving, the traffic and the wind and the lights of the city that neither of them, in that moment, was thinking about. Inside the Ardmore, with the quartet easing into something that sounded almost like hope, Evelyn Carter shook hands with a man she'd known for 45 minutes and felt, for the first time since a ring box had slid across white linen, something that was not quite grief. It was something harder and less comfortable than grief. It felt, disturbingly, like the beginning of something. The contract took 3 days to write. Not because it was complicated. Evelyn had drafted more complex agreements on a Tuesday morning with cold coffee and 2 hours of sleep, but because every time she sat down to finish it, she found herself reading back through the clauses and feeling the specific discomfort of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and was doing it anyway. Party A, Damian Blackwood, and Party B, Evelyn Carter, agreed to the following arrangement for a period of 6 calendar months, beginning on the date of both parties' signatures. She'd written cleaner sentences for worse situations. That wasn't the problem. The problem was the clause she kept rewriting, the one governing physical conduct, public displays of affection, the performance of intimacy for an audience. She wrote it 5 different ways. Too clinical, too vague, too much like she was writing rules for something she already suspected wouldn't follow rules. She settled on conduct consistent with a committed romantic relationship, within limits agreed upon verbally by both parties, and told herself that was professional. She sent it to him on a Thursday morning. He returned it signed by Thursday afternoon, with one addition in the margin, handwritten, not typed, that said only, Clause 7, either party may terminate with 30 days written notice. No explanation required. He'd added a protection for her. She sat with that longer than she should have. The first event was a charity auction at the Art Institute, the kind of evening where Chicago's moneyed class dressed up and bid on things they didn't need to fund causes that made them feel less guilty about the things they did need. Evelyn had been to 2 of these in her life, both times as Ryan's +1, both times feeling exactly like what she was. A legal aid attorney in a borrowed dress standing in a room full of people who had never worried about their electric bill. Damian sent a car. Then he sent a dress. The dress was in a garment bag hanging from the back of her apartment door when she got home from work at 6:15, with a note that said, "Wear what you want. This is an option."
She almost wore her own dress out of principle. The dress in the bag was deep burgundy silk with a back that required confidence she wasn't sure she had. And when she put it on and stood in front of her bathroom mirror, she looked like someone she didn't entirely recognize. She wore it. He was waiting in the lobby of the Institute when she arrived. Not pacing, not checking his phone, just standing with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the particular stillness that she was already beginning to understand was simply his default state. He was wearing a dark suit that had not come off any rack, and when he saw her, he didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You look like someone who belongs here." It was almost exactly what Ryan used to say about that blue dress. The difference was that Ryan had said it like a compliment he was handing her, something to make her feel permitted. Damian said it like a fact he was simply noting. She didn't know if that was better. She suspected it was. "Do you actually care about this auction?" she asked as they walked in. "I care about the children's hospital it benefits," he said. "I don't care about the auction." She filed that away. They were inside for approximately 11 minutes before she saw Ryan. He was across the room with Vanessa Harrington on his arm. And Vanessa Harrington was, Evelyn had to be honest with herself, strikingly beautiful in the way that serious money and generations of careful grooming produces. Tall, blonde, the kind of effortless elegance that was actually the result of enormous effort made invisible. Ryan was leaning down to say something in her ear, and Vanessa was laughing, and they looked from a distance like a couple from a magazine spread about people who had everything arranged correctly. Evelyn felt the familiar grip at her sternum. Then Damian's hand settled at the small of her back. Not possessive, not performative, just present, warm through the silk. The hand of someone who had decided for tonight that she was his to stand beside, and who intended to do that without any particular drama. "Breathe," he said quietly, not looking at her. "I am breathing." Differently. She breathed differently. They moved into the room. It took Ryan 4 minutes to notice them. She counted. She watched him do the double take, the slight jolt, the second look, the very specific recalibration of a man who has walked into a situation he did not anticipate. He recovered quickly. He was good at recovering, but the recovery itself was visible to anyone who knew what they were looking for. Vanessa noticed Damian almost immediately, and that reaction was not recovery. That was something rawer and faster, something that crossed her face before the composure snapped back into place. Her eyes went to Evelyn next, assessing, and Evelyn watched the woman perform the quick, brutal calculation that beautiful women in powerful rooms do automatically, threat or non-threat, relevant or irrelevant, someone to remember or someone to dismiss. Vanessa's eyes came back to Damian. She had apparently reached a conclusion. "She's already calculating," Evelyn murmured. "She always was," Damian said. His voice was completely even. "That was the part I mistook for intelligence." They stayed 2 hours. Evelyn bid on a landscape she didn't want and won it for $800, which was approximately $790 more than her discretionary budget allowed. Damian paid for it without being asked, and when she opened her mouth, he said quietly, "Don't." And she closed it again because the alternative was an argument in front of a room full of people who were definitely watching them. Ryan found her near the bar at the 90-minute mark. She'd been half expecting it and was still not entirely prepared for the reality of him. The familiar face, the voice she'd heard say her name 1,000 times in 1,000 different tones, none of which had ever been the one where he told her she was someone he'd file away when something better presented itself. "Evelyn." He said her name carefully, the way you'd approach something you weren't sure was stable. "Ryan." "You look—" He stopped. Restarted. "I didn't know you knew Damian Blackwood. I know lots of people. Blackwood is—" He lowered his voice. "Evelyn, do you know who he is? What he's actually involved in?" "What are you actually involved in?" she asked pleasantly. "A career opportunity, right?" His jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," she agreed. "It really isn't." He looked across the room to where Damian was in conversation with a man Evelyn didn't recognize, large and silver-haired, the kind of person who gestured with his whole arm when he talked. Damian was listening with that contained attention of his, nodding once, and the silver-haired man was laughing. "How long has this been going on?" Ryan asked. "Long enough," Evelyn said. "Evelyn." His voice dropped further, and now there was something in it she hadn't heard in a long time, something that might have been genuine. I know what I did wasn't… Ryan, she kept her voice warm and even. I genuinely don't have anything to say to you about that. Have a good evening. She walked back toward Damian and felt Ryan's eyes on her back the entire way. In the car afterward, she took off her heels and held them in her lap and stared out the window at the city going by, and neither of them spoke for almost 5 minutes. He approached you, Damian said, not a question. Yes.
What did he want? To warn me about you. She paused, and to check whether I was over him. Are you? She thought about it honestly, because dishonesty in this particular car with this particular man felt not just wrong, but wasteful. I'm working on it, she said. Damian nodded once. Fair answer. He asked how long we'd been… She gestured vaguely. Whatever we're supposed to be. What did you say? Long enough? Another silence. The city kept moving outside the glass. Vanessa looked at you, Evelyn said. I know. The way she looked at you. I know, he said again, and his voice had a quality in it that closed the subject. Not anger, something older than anger. The particular tiredness of someone who has already done all the necessary grieving and is simply done now. She didn't push. The second event was a corporate gala 2 weeks later, and this time Vanessa engineered a direct encounter. Evelyn saw it happening from 20 feet away, watched Vanessa excuse herself from a conversation and begin moving through the room with the practiced ease of a woman who had spent her entire life navigating social spaces like a chessboard. She had a champagne glass in one hand and nothing but intention in her eyes, and she was aimed directly at Damian. Evelyn had approximately 45 seconds to decide what to do with that information. She chose to stay exactly where she was, beside him, close enough that their arms nearly touched, and to keep talking to the woman beside her, a hospital administrator named Linda, who was telling a story about a grant application, and to look completely unaware that a very beautiful and very calculated woman was bearing down on them like weather. Damian. Vanessa's voice was low and warm, the voice of a woman who had once had the right to that tone. I was hoping I'd see you tonight. Vanessa. He said it neutrally. Not cold, neutral. The difference was significant. You look well. Her eyes moved to Evelyn, stayed there a beat. This must be… Evelyn Carter, Evelyn said, extending her hand. Firm, dry. Nice to meet you. Vanessa shook it. Her grip was perfect, confident, brief. The handshake of someone who had been trained since childhood to make every interaction appear effortless. Carter, she said. I don't think I know the name. Legal aid, Evelyn said simply. Not a lot of overlap with your circles, probably. Something shifted in Vanessa's expression. Not much, she was too good for much. But enough. The small recalibration of a woman who had expected something else and was reassessing. You're in law, she said, pivoting smoothly. Damian, you never mentioned you had a preference for lawyers. She said it lightly, like a joke between people who had a history that allowed for jokes. You never asked about my preferences, Damian said. His voice was still neutral. His hand was at Evelyn's back again, and this time there was nothing uncertain about the placement. Is there something you needed, Vanessa? The warmth in her expression dimmed precisely 1 degree. I just wanted to say hello. She held his gaze a moment longer than the sentence required. We should catch up sometime, properly. We're caught up, he said. She left with her champagne glass and her composure intact, and Evelyn waited until she was 20 feet away before she exhaled. You all right? She asked quietly. Damian was watching Vanessa's retreating back. She wanted to see if you were real. What does that mean? She expected a prop. His jaw moved slightly. Someone I'd hired for the evening. Someone who'd disappear. Evelyn thought about the contract in her desk drawer, said nothing. She'll be back, he said. That wasn't her trying. That was her assessing. I was right. Of course he was right. 3 days after the gala, Evelyn arrived at her office to find a voicemail from an unknown number that turned out to be Vanessa Harrington's personal cell, asking if they might have coffee. Woman to woman, she'd said. No agenda. Evelyn played it twice. Then she called Damian. She called you directly, he said. Yes. She found your number. Yes. A pause on his end. She's thorough. What do I do? Another pause, longer.
She heard him exhale. Not dramatically, just the breath of someone thinking through a problem with real weight to it. What do you want to do? I asked you first. Because you already know what you want to do, he said. And you want someone to tell you you're not crazy for it. She sat with that. Outside her office window, 2 pigeons were doing something aggressive with a piece of bread. I want to meet her, Evelyn said. I know.
She's going to try to get information. Yes. About us. About what we are. Whether it's real. Yes. And you're okay with me going? You're not my employee, Evelyn. His voice was even. You don't need my clearance.
I'm not asking for clearance. I'm asking if you… She stopped. Reframed. Does it complicate anything for you if I meet her? A longer pause this time. When he spoke, his voice was slightly different, still level, but with something underneath it that she was beginning to recognize as Damian Blackwood's version of careful honesty. It complicates things for me if you meet her and she says something that makes you want to end the contract, he said. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Noted, she said. The coffee was at a place in River North, the kind of cafe that had reclaimed wood and single-origin pour-overs and the ambient noise level of a library, which meant every conversation was technically private and also completely audible to anyone paying attention. Vanessa was already there when Evelyn arrived, which was deliberate, the power move of making someone walk toward you rather than the other way around. She was in a cream-colored coat and no visible jewelry except for a watch that cost more than Evelyn's annual salary, and she stood up with a smile that was genuinely practiced enough to seem genuine. Thank you for coming, she said. Sure, Evelyn said. They ordered, sat. Vanessa made small talk for approximately 90 seconds, the length of time, Evelyn calculated, that she'd decided constituted appropriate social preamble. Then, how did you meet him? At a bar, Evelyn said. Why? I'm curious. Vanessa wrapped both hands around her cup. He's not someone who meets people casually. He's very deliberate about who he lets in. Maybe he's changed. People like Damian don't change. She said it without cruelty, almost with something like sadness. That's not a criticism. It's just, he's very fixed in who he is and what he does and how he operates. Did he tell you about his business? Some, Evelyn said carefully. Did he tell you all of it? Evelyn looked at her. Did you have an agenda when you said you didn't have one, or did you forget? Something flickered in Vanessa's expression. Then, surprisingly, something that was actually closer to respect than she'd expected. I'm trying to help you, Vanessa said. I don't think that's what you're doing. I know how this looks. She set down her cup. But I spent 14 months with Damian Blackwood, and I watched what his world does to people. To the people around him. The risk is real, Evelyn. Whatever he's told you, whatever you think you know about him, whatever I think I know, Evelyn said. Okay. The men who work for him. You ended it with him to marry a politician. Evelyn's voice was still even, still pleasant, still the voice she used with hostile witnesses. The concern for my safety is touching, but you made your decision about Damian's world 6 weeks ago, and the reason wasn't safety. Vanessa's cup stopped halfway to her mouth. You wanted something his world couldn't give you, Evelyn said. That's fine, that's your choice. But don't come to me with concern for my well-being when what you actually want to know is whether you made a mistake. Vanessa set her cup down slowly. Did I? She asked. Her voice was quieter now. The performance was slightly thinner. I have no idea, Evelyn said honestly. I'm not the right person to answer that. Vanessa stopped, started again. He looks at you differently than he used to look at me. Evelyn said nothing. I used to catch him watching me like he was trying to memorize something before it disappeared. Her voice had gone somewhere more complicated. He doesn't look at me that way now. He looks at you like… She shook her head slightly. Like you're already there, like you're already… She seemed to run out of sentence. Evelyn sat very still. I think we're done, she said after a moment. Thank you for the coffee. She sat in her car for 12 minutes before she could drive. Not because of what Vanessa had said about Damian's world. She had known, going in, what Damian's world was. You didn't spend your professional life in the spaces where law and its absence met without developing a clear-eyed understanding of what organized crime looked like from the outside and what it required from everyone inside it. She had walked into the contract with her eyes open, and she kept them open. It was the other thing. The thing Vanessa had said with that thinning composure and that complicated voice. He looks at you like you're already there. She started the car. She drove. She did not call Damian. She went home and made tea she didn't drink and stood at her window looking at the city and tried to locate the exact moment when the contract had started feeling like something else. She couldn't find it. That was the problem. There was no moment, no single point she could identify and say there. That's where it shifted. It was more like the way water gets into a foundation, slow, constant, invisible, until the damage was already done. She picked up her phone, put it down, picked it up again. She was not calling Damian. She was calling her friend Melissa, who was the one person who knew the full situation and whose response to all of it had been an extended silence followed by Evelyn, "I need you to listen to what you just told me." Melissa picked up on the second ring. "She found me," Evelyn said. "Vanessa Harrington found you." "We had coffee." Another of those silences. "Evelyn?" "She said he looks at me differently than he looked at her." "Evelyn." "I'm fine." "You're calling me at 9:30 on a Wednesday, which means you're not fine." "The contract has 4 months left." "This is a business arrangement. You keep saying that because it's true." "Okay." Melissa's voice was careful, gentle, the voice of someone choosing not to say the obvious thing. How did it feel when she said that? Evelyn looked at her reflection in the dark window, hair still up from work, wearing the cardigan she always wore when she was stress-avoiding instead of stress-eating. "Like a warning," she said. "Or like a—" She stopped. "Like a what?" Like something she wasn't ready to name. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said, and hung up. Damian called at 10:15. She almost didn't answer. She answered. "How was it?" he asked. "She wants you back." A pause. "I know." "She's going to keep trying." "I know." She said. Evelyn stopped, decided. She said, "You look at me differently than you looked at her." The silence on his end was the specific quality of silence that meant someone was choosing their next words with care. "Does that concern you?" he asked finally. "Does it concern you?" she said. He didn't answer immediately. She heard him move, saw a chair maybe, or a window. And when he spoke again, his voice was slightly lower, the particular register she'd noticed he dropped into when he wasn't performing anything for anyone. "The arrangement was supposed to be simple," he said. "Yes." "It was supposed to be clean." "Yes." "Evelyn." Her name and his voice had a different weight in it than it had 3 weeks ago. She noticed that and wished she hadn't. "I need to tell you something about next Saturday." "What about it?" "The Donovan Foundation dinner." A pause. "Ryan Whitmore is going to be there, and I've been told he's been asking about you." She absorbed that. "Asking what?" "Whether we're serious." Another pause. "Whether you're happy." She sat down. Her knees had made a decision before her brain had. "Someone in my organization told me this morning," Damian said. "I should have called earlier. I didn't because I was deciding how to say it. You're never not sure how to say things." "No," he said. "I'm usually not." She understood what he wasn't saying, that the hesitation itself was information, that the fact he'd spent the day deciding how to tell her was more significant than anything either of them wanted to acknowledge. "I'll be at the dinner," she said. "I know." A pause. "Evelyn, be careful with yourself." She opened her mouth, closed it. What she wanted to say was tangled up with what she understood about this arrangement and what Vanessa had said in a River North cafe and what it meant that she'd sat in her car for 12 minutes because of it. What she said was, "You too." She hung up. She stood. She went to her desk and pulled out the contract, the actual document, the one with both their signatures and Damian's handwritten margin note, and she read Clause 7 again. Either party may terminate with 30 days written notice. No explanation required. He had added that clause. For her. A clean exit, anytime she needed it, no questions, no cost. She folded the contract and put it back in the drawer and did not think about the fact that she hadn't once considered using it. Outside, Chicago hummed and pressed against her windows, and somewhere in it, Ryan Whitmore was asking people whether she was happy, and Vanessa Harrington was deciding on her next move, and the dinner on Saturday was coming whether she was ready or not. And Evelyn Carter, legal aid attorney, Woman who believed in honesty and had signed a contract that was starting to feel like the most honest thing she'd done in years, turned off her desk lamp and went to bed without answers, which was perhaps the most human thing she had done since the whole impossible arrangement began. The Donovan Foundation dinner was held at a private club on Michigan Avenue that had been private since 1887 and intended to remain so. The kind of place where the carpet was the color of old money and the staff had been trained to be invisible, and the guest list was curated with the specific intention of ensuring that everyone present already knew everyone else. Evelyn had been in buildings like this before, always as someone's guest, always aware of the precise geometry of her position, welcomed but conditional, present but provisional, the kind of person these rooms tolerated rather than claimed. She walked in beside Damian Blackwood, and the geometry was different. She couldn't have explained it immediately. It was something in the way the room received him, the slight reorganization of attention that happened when he entered, heads turning not with hostility, but with the specific alertness of people who understood power and were calibrating accordingly. And because she was beside him, arm linked through his, the calibration extended to her. She was not tolerated. She was noted. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. She filed it. Ryan was there within the first 20 minutes, which she'd expected. What she hadn't expected was that he came alone. Vanessa was visible across the room in conversation with a cluster of people near the bar, deliberately not looking in Ryan's direction with the particular effort of someone who was very much tracking exactly where he was. Trouble in the practical arrangement, Evelyn thought, then felt small for thinking it. Ryan found her near the window, which was also probably not accidental. He had the look of a man who had been rehearsing. "I need 5 minutes," he said. "Just 5 minutes. Privately." Damian was across the room. She could see him from here. The controlled posture, the contained attention, one hand in his jacket pocket. He wasn't looking at her. He was listening to an older man talk about something, and whatever it was, Damian's expression said he was filing it carefully. 5 minutes, Evelyn said. They found a corridor off the main room. The kind of corridor these places always had, dim and carpeted and smelling of old wood and the accumulated discretion of 130 years. Ryan turned to face her. Up close, he looked tired. Not the charming, slightly rumpled tired that had always seemed to make him more attractive to clients and judges alike, but genuinely tired, the kind that came from somewhere internal. "I made a mistake," he said. Evelyn waited. I know it doesn't." He ran a hand through his hair, which was the most unpolished thing she'd seen him do in 4 years. "Vanessa and I aren't. It's not what I thought it would be. She's..." He stopped, restarted. "I think I confused what I wanted with what I thought I was supposed to want." Ryan. "I know. You ended a 4-year relationship by pushing a ring across a restaurant table." "I know." His voice had something raw in it. "I know what I did." "And you married her?" "Not yet." He looked at her. "The wedding isn't until spring." Evelyn, "No." She said it quietly and completely. "Whatever you're about to say, no." "Will you just listen?" "I am listening. I've been listening. And what I'm hearing is that the arrangement you made stopped delivering what you expected, and now you'd like to revisit your options." She kept her voice level. "That's not a conversation I'm willing to have." "It's not about options." His jaw was tight now. "I'm trying to tell you that what we had was what you had before something better came along," she said. "And now that better isn't what you thought, you're back. And I'm supposed to..." "What? Be relieved? Be available?" He looked at her, and for a second something genuinely naked moved across his face. Not manipulation, not performance, just the actual face of a man who had miscalculated badly, and knew it. "I love you," he said. "I think I didn't stop. I just got practical." "Evelyn." "Go back inside, Ryan." She left him in the corridor. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She'd expected some version of collapse, some physical evidence of the fact that the man she'd loved for 4 years had just said the words she'd spent months wanting to hear, and she felt essentially nothing except a distant, almost clinical sense of being done. She found Damian exactly where she'd left him. He looked at her face and something shifted in his expression. Not much, but enough. "You okay?" he asked,
quiet enough that no one around them could hear. "Yes," she said. And then, because it was true, "He said he loves me." Damian's jaw moved slightly. Nothing else changed. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said go back inside." He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached over and picked up her champagne glass from the nearby table and handed it to her, and somehow that small, practical gesture, no comment, no processing, just, "Here, you might need this," was the thing that made her throat tighten. She drank. The night would have ended there, manageable and almost clean, except that at 10:47 Evelyn's phone buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize. "You should know what your contract partner has been doing. Meet me, tonight, 30 minutes, address below." She stared at it. Then she showed it to Damian. He read it. His face did not change, but something behind it did. She could see it, that fractional internal shift she was getting better at reading. The reorganization of a man who has just received information he was not entirely surprised by. "You know who this is," she said. "I have a guess." "Who?" He looked at her. "Don't go." "Damian. Whatever they want to tell you, it's designed to—" "Who is it?" His jaw was tight. "A man named Gerald Foss. He runs logistics for a competitor operation on the south side. He and I have—" He paused. "An ongoing disagreement." "What kind of disagreement?" "The kind that has lawyers, and also the kind that doesn't." She looked at the message again. The address was 6 blocks away. "What does he want me to know?" "Nothing true," Damian said. "Or nothing completely true. The kind of truth that gets arranged for an audience." "Then it shouldn't matter if I hear it." "Evelyn." His voice was still level, but there was something underneath it now that wasn't quite controlled. "I'm asking you not to go." "You're asking?" "Yes." "Not telling?" "No." She looked at him. He looked back. There was something happening in the space between them that had nothing to do with Gerald Foss or Ryan's corridor confession or Vanessa's calculations. Something that had been building since a jazz bar, and a handwritten margin note, and a hand at the small of her back that was present without being possessive. "If I go," she said carefully, "and it's a manipulation, we deal with it." "Yes. And if it's something else?" He held her gaze. "Then you deal with it." She went. The address was a bar 3 grades down from Ardmore. Functional, loud enough for privacy. The kind of place that had seen enough of what happened between people in this city that it had stopped being surprised by any of it. Gerald Foss was in a corner booth. Early 50s, heavy through the shoulders, with the face of a man who had negotiated difficult things for a long time and had the interior weather to show for it. He had a whiskey in front of him and nothing else on the table. "Ms. Carter." He nodded, not unkind, which she found more alarming than hostility would have been. "Thank you for coming." "What do you want?" she said, not sitting. "To give you information." He gestured at the seat across from him. "Whether you use it is up to you." She sat, remained coiled. "Blackwood's been managing something," Foss said. He wrapped both hands around his glass, not drinking, just holding. "Something that's going to surface in the next 8 to 12 weeks whether he wants it to or not. A federal investigation has been building for about 14 months. The noise of the bar kept going around them. Someone laughed at the other end. The TV above the bar was showing sports scores. "That's not—" She kept her voice flat. "That's not information. That's a threat with extra steps." "It's context," Foss said. "The investigation targets 3 specific operations. One of them ties directly to a warehouse district property that Blackwood's legitimate holding company owns on paper." He paused. "And the company that manages that property, the LLC that sits between Blackwood and the physical asset, is registered to a name you might recognize." He slid a piece of paper across the table. She looked at it. The name on it was one she'd helped register 14 months ago. A small property management LLC, routine work, a client she'd taken on through a referral during a particularly brutal stretch of caseload. She'd done the filing. She'd signed the documents as notarizing attorney. She'd done it clean, or she'd thought she'd done it clean, because the man who'd brought her the referral was a paralegal she'd trusted for 3 years. The LLC name stared up at her from the paper. Her own signature was at the bottom. "That's—" Her voice stopped working for a second. She made it work. "That's not—"
I filed that for a client. That was legitimate work. I know you didn't know, Foss said. He didn't sound triumphant. He sounded like a man delivering something he found genuinely unpleasant. That's why I'm telling you instead of letting you find out when the investigators do. The referral came from Marcus Teal. Marcus, who had worked 2 offices down from her for 3 years, who brought her coffee sometimes when the afternoon ran long, who had handed her a routine filing with a smile and said the client was a property developer who needed a quick turnaround. Marcus works for Blackwood, Foss said, has for about 2 years. Not directly, 2 steps removed. But the connection is there, and when the federal case opens up, it will be documented. He paused. You were brought in deliberately. The filing needed an attorney's signature. It needed someone clean and credible. You were selected. Evelyn stared at the paper. The bar noise kept going. The TV kept running scores. Somewhere very far away, the rest of her evening was still happening. Damian at a dinner on Michigan Avenue. Ryan in a corridor saying I love you. Vanessa calculating her next move. And here she was in a booth in a loud bar looking at her own signature on a document that had been designed from the beginning to include her. He used me, she said. Someone in his organization did. Foss was careful with the distinction. Whether Blackwood himself directed it or whether it was done without his knowledge. Don't! Her voice came out sharp. Don't manage me. Did he know? Foss picked up his glass. Drank. Set it down. I don't know, he said, and he said it with the particular flatness of someone who actually meant it. I genuinely don't know. What I know is that the structure was deliberate, the timing was deliberate, and you were chosen specifically because your professional reputation is clean. He held her gaze. If the investigation surfaces the LLC and your signature is on the founding documents, your license is at risk. Your career, everything you've spent 10 years building. She sat very still. Why are you telling me? She asked. What's your angle? Blackwood and I have competing interests, he said. He knows that. This isn't about hurting you. If I wanted to use this against you, I would have gone to the investigators directly. He turned his glass in a slow circle. I'm telling you because you're not what he usually puts beside him, and because what's coming down is going to catch everyone in his orbit, and I don't think you knew what orbit you stepped into. She stood up. The paper was still on the table. She picked it up. How long do I have? She said. Before the investigation goes active. 8 weeks? Maybe 10. She put the paper in her bag. She walked out. But she sat in her car for a long time. Not 12 minutes this time. Longer. She sat and breathed and watched people move past on the sidewalk and tried to locate the version of herself who had walked into Ardmore on a November night and thought she was making a reasonable, contained, reversible decision. She couldn't find her. That woman felt like someone she'd read about. She called Melissa. No answer. She called her office number and got voicemail and hung up. She sat. Here was what she knew. Her signature was on a document she had filed in good faith, which had been used in a structure she had not understood, which was now embedded in a federal investigation she had not known existed, and the man at the center of it was also the man who had been looking at her, according to his former partner, like she was already there. Here was what she didn't know. Whether he had sent Marcus Teal to her office, whether the whole thing, the bar, the contract, the hand at her back, had been a layer of the same structure, a way of keeping her close and manageable and invested while her signature sat at the bottom of a document doing its quiet work. She did not want that to be true. The fact that she did not want it to be true was itself a problem. She drove to the penthouse. Not her apartment, the penthouse he'd set up as their shared residence for the purpose of the arrangement, the place she'd been spending 4 nights a week for 2 months because it was closer to her office, and because, if she was honest, which she was, always, to her own detriment, because she'd started falling asleep there without the low-level anxiety that had been her baseline for most of her adult life. The security downstairs knew her. She went up without being announced. That was new. That had started about 3 weeks ago, the point at which she'd apparently become someone who didn't need to be checked. Damian was in the main room, jacket off, collar open, sitting at the long table with documents spread in front of him and a phone to his ear. He saw her come in, said something brief into the phone, and hung up. He looked at her face. Tell me, she said. Evelyn? Tell me right now whether you knew. Her voice was absolutely steady.
She had spent years learning to be steady in rooms where people were lying to her or withholding things or rearranging facts for their own survival, and she was using all of it. Marcus Teal, the LLC. Tell me if you knew. Something moved through his face, not guilt, not exactly. Something more complicated and less readable. The expression of a man who is weighing things that have different values in different accounting systems. Sit down, he said. I don't want to sit down. Evelyn. He stood. Slowly, the way you move when you don't want the other person to read threat into the motion. What did Foss tell you? Don't do that. Don't make this about Foss. He's not a neutral source. My signature is on a document that's embedded in a federal investigation. She heard her own voice, and it was shaking now, slightly. Not with grief this time, but with something colder and more precise. My signature. My license. My career. And the referral came through a man who has ties to your organization, and I need you to stand there and tell me right now, looking at me, whether any part of the last 3 months has been, no. His voice cut through hers, hard and immediate and completely unambiguous. No. Whatever Foss told you, whatever structure he laid out, the decision to use you was not mine. I did not send Teal to you. I did not know your name before Ardmore. She looked at him. I didn't know, he said. His voice had dropped to the lower register, the one without performance in it. When I find out something is happening in my organization without my direction, I deal with it. I have not been dealing with this because I did not know. But now you do, she said. A pause. Now I do. Marcus Teal. Yes. 2 steps removed from you. Yes. Was he acting independently? Damian's jaw worked. This was where it got complicated. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the specific tension of a man who had been running something large and complex for a long time, and who understood that clean answers about chain of command were luxuries. I don't know yet, he said. You need to know, she said. I need you to know, tonight. Because if there are people in your organization making decisions that pull my name and my career and my license into federal exposures, decisions that you didn't authorize but that happened anyway, then I need to understand what I'm actually inside. She held his gaze. The contract said certain things. It didn't say this. No, he said. It didn't. So what is this? He looked at her with the full weight of whatever it was that lived behind the eyes of a man who had built something enormous from nothing and was now standing in his own penthouse watching the thing he hadn't planned for threaten the one part of his life he hadn't been managing. This is something I need to fix, he said. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have right now. She was quiet. The city was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. All those lights, all that movement, Chicago doing what Chicago always did regardless of whatever private catastrophe was unfolding in any given penthouse at any given hour. I need tonight, she said finally. I need to think. Okay. I'm going to my apartment. Okay. Don't send anyone after me. She said it without accusation, just as a fact she needed stated. I need to be alone, and I need to know that's actually what alone means. Something in his face that she couldn't name. All right. She picked up her bag. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button and stood waiting for it, and she could feel him behind her. Not moving, not speaking, just present in the way he was always present, that terrible steady gravity of him. And she did not turn around. The elevator opened. She stepped in. Evelyn. She turned. He was standing exactly where she'd left him, collar still open, the documents still spread behind him on the table, the whole machinery of his life visible and working and enormous. I didn't use you, he said. I need you to hold on to that while you think. The elevator doors closed. She stood in the small mirrored space of the elevator and looked at her own face. The controlled face, the professional face, the face she'd assembled over years of rooms where everything was at stake. And underneath it, she could see the thing she'd been trying not to name since a River North cafe. She had believed him, immediately, without evidence or documentation or the careful legal scaffolding she built around every other significant decision in her life. She had believed him because somewhere in the last 3 months, without a specific moment she could point to, she had started to trust Damian Blackwood, not the contract, not the arrangement, not the useful fiction of them, but him, the actual man who had added a protective clause in the margin and handed her a champagne glass without commentary and said, "Be careful with yourself on a phone call," like it cost him something. And now her signature was inside his world in a way she hadn't chosen, and 8 weeks from now a federal investigation would go active, and every careful professional thing she had built would be standing in the blast radius. The lobby doors opened. The night air hit her. She stood on the sidewalk outside Damian Blackwood's building and understood, with the particular clarity that only arrives when all the comfortable options have been removed, that the woman who had walked into Ardmore thinking she was making a contained and reversible decision was gone. And the woman standing here now had a choice between dismantling everything or doing something she didn't have a name for yet, something that would require her to be harder and more deliberate and more willing to step into the dark than she had ever allowed herself to be. She started walking. The city moved around her the way it always did. Indifferent, enormous, beautiful, indifferent. And Evelyn Carter walked through it with her hands cold and her jaw set, and her mind already working, already pulling apart the problem, the way she pulled apart every problem that had ever mattered, with the dogged, unglamorous, furious intelligence of a woman who had never once in her life waited for someone else to save her. She didn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop open and the LLC documents pulled up from her own archived files and a yellow legal pad beside her, and she worked. Not frantically. That was the thing about Evelyn Carter under genuine pressure, the thing that had gotten her through 3 years of law school on scholarships and loans and sheer refusal, through a bar exam she'd taken 6 weeks after her mother's funeral, through 412 client cases in 7 years at legal aid. She went quiet. She went still and quiet and methodical, the way a surgeon goes still, the way anyone goes still when the thing in front of them is too important for noise. She read every document she had from the Marcus Teal referral, every email, every filing confirmation. She made a timeline on the yellow pad, dates, actions, who had signed what and when. And she looked at it for a long time, and then she started a second column, which was the column of things she didn't have and would need. At 2 in the morning, she called a number she had not called in 2 years. Evelyn. Dennis Haar was a former federal prosecutor who now ran a white-collar defense practice on LaSalle Street, and who had once told her at a bar association dinner 5 years ago that if she ever needed anything, she should call without explanation, and he would pick up. He had said it like a man who meant it. She had never tested it until now. He picked up on the third ring. She heard him moving, the rustle of someone sitting up in a dark room. "I may have a problem," she said. "Tell me." She told him. All of it. The referral, the filing, the LLC, what Foss had said about the federal investigation timeline. She left out the parts about Damian that weren't relevant to the legal exposure, which was harder to calibrate than she'd expected because more of it was relevant than she wanted it to be. Dennis was quiet for a moment when she finished. "The filing itself," he said. "Walk me through your due diligence at the time." She walked him through it. He asked 3 questions. She answered them with the precision of someone who had been maintaining her own internal case file since the moment she'd seen the paper in Foss's bar. "You're not the target," Dennis said. "If the investigation is structured the way this sounds, you're a pathway. They may want to talk to you, not prosecute you." "May. Your signature on the founding documents is a problem regardless. We'd need to establish clearly that you had no knowledge of the downstream use." A pause. "Do you have any exposure with Blackwood directly, beyond the LLC?" She thought about a contract in her desk drawer. "No." "Are you certain?" "Yes." She said it without hesitation because it was true. Whatever else the arrangement was, it had never intersected with anything prosecutable, and the contract itself was a private civil document between 2 people managing a personal situation. "All right." She heard him writing something. "I want you in my office at 8. Don't talk to anyone connected to Blackwood's organization between now and then. Don't reach out to Teal." "Understood." "Evelyn." A pause. "How did you find out about the investigation?" "A man named Gerald Foss." "Foss." His voice changed fractionally. He's not a reliable source. He has his own interests." "I know, but the documents are real. My signature is real." "Yes," Dennis said. "That part is real." She was in his office at 7:58 with the yellow legal pad and her archived files and 4 hours of non-sleep behind her eyes, and coffee she'd made at 5 a.m. that had been too strong and had not worked.
Dennis Haar was a precise, gray-haired man who had the face of someone who had heard worse and the manner of someone who intended to be useful about it. He read through everything she'd brought. He asked questions. He made his own notes in a handwriting so small it looked like a different language. At 9:15, he set his pen down. "Here's where you are," he said. "The LLC filing is legally defensible as good faith professional service. The due diligence you performed was reasonable given the referral context. If the investigation surfaces this, and it may, you are a witness potentially, but you are not a co-conspirator." He paused. "The larger issue is your current proximity to Blackwood." Define proximity. Public association. The press has run 3 items in the last 6 weeks placing you at his side at public events. You are known to be, whatever the word is. "Involved," she said flatly. "If the investigation goes active and you are visibly connected to him, the optics create problems regardless of your legal position. Defense attorneys deal with optics as much as law, sometimes more." She stared at the table. "What are you telling me to do?" she asked. "I'm telling you what the exposure looks like. What you do with it is your decision." He held her gaze. "But I'll tell you what I'd tell any client in this position. Clean separation, documented and visible, is the strongest protection you have. Distance yourself from Blackwood now. Cooperate proactively with investigators if and when they approach, and let the filing stand on its own legal merits." She sat with that. Clean separation, documented and visible. End the contract, step back. Return to the carefully maintained life she'd had before a November night, and a jazz bar, and a man who had handed her a champagne glass without saying anything. "If I do that," she said carefully, "and the investigation surfaces anyway, does it help me?" "Significantly." "And if I don't?" Dennis looked at her with the level gaze of a man who was not going to moralize. "Then you are betting that his legal team is better than the federal government's, and that your connection to him is an asset rather than a liability." He paused. "I've seen people win that bet. I've seen more people lose it." She picked up her coffee. It was cold. She drank it anyway. She called Damian from the street outside Dennis's building. 8:45 a.m., Chicago, doing its morning thing around her, the buses and the suits and the coffee shop lines, and the absolute indifference of a working city to any individual's private catastrophe. He picked up immediately. She had a feeling he'd been waiting. "I need to see you," she said. "Not the penthouse. Somewhere neutral." A pause. "The Ardmore. Noon." "Fine." She hung up. She stood on LaSalle Street for a moment with her phone in her hand and the wind off the lake doing something aggressive to her hair. And she thought about Dennis's words, clean separation, documented and visible. And she thought about Clause 7 in the contract. And she thought about an elevator and a man standing with his collar open saying, "I didn't use you," like it was the most important sentence he'd said in months. Then she went back to her office and worked for 3 hours and did not think about any of it. Ardmore at noon was different from Ardmore at night. Quieter, emptier, the amber light less romantic and more honest. Just a bar with good acoustics and a bartender restocking shelves. The piano was silent. It looked smaller without the music. Damian was already there. He was in the same booth she'd been sitting in the night they met. She noticed that, filed it, told herself it was coincidence. He had coffee in front of him and nothing else, and he looked like a man who had also not slept, which on him manifested as a particular intensity in the eyes, rather than the visible deterioration it had produced in her. She sat down, didn't take off her coat. "Marcus Teal," she said. "He's been removed from my organization." Damian's voice was level. "As of this morning." "Removed how?" "Legally." He looked at her. "He's no longer employed by any entity I control. He's been informed that his arrangements are terminated and that any further association will be treated as trespass." A pause. "He knows what that means." "And the LLC?" "My legal team is working on establishing the chain of separation between that entity and my holding company. It's—" He stopped. "It's not clean. The structure was built to look connected enough to be useful and disconnected enough to be deniable, and that cuts both ways. Untangling it takes time we may not have." 8 weeks, she said. "Maybe 10. "Yes. I have a lawyer." "I know, Dennis Haar." At her expression, "I keep track of things that are relevant to me."
I'm relevant to you. Yes, he said, without elaboration. Just yes. She looked at him. The bar's quiet settled around them. He told me to end this, she said.
The arrangement, publicly and visibly, clean separation. Damian's expression didn't change. I know. That's the rational choice. It protects my license, my career, my professional standing. It removes me from the blast radius. She kept her voice even. I spent 10 years building what I have. Legal aid isn't glamorous, and it doesn't pay well, and it is the thing I actually care about. The clients. The work. If I lose my license, I don't just lose a job, I lose the only… She stopped herself. It's the rational choice. I know,
he said again. Stop saying that. I'm not arguing with you. I know you're not. She pressed her fingers flat against the table. That's what's making this hard. You're not arguing. You're not trying to keep me here. You're just sitting there being what? She looked at him. Being honest. He looked back. There was something in his face she'd never quite seen before. Not the controlled neutrality, not the contained assessment, but something exposed in the way a wound is exposed, unwillingly and completely. I should have known about the LLC, he said. I should have had tighter oversight of what Teal was doing in my name. That failure has put you in a position you didn't choose and didn't deserve. He paused.
If you end this, I won't. I have nothing to say against it. You'd be right. It would be the right decision. But, she said, no, but. He held her gaze. I'm not going to ask you to stay inside something dangerous to protect my feelings. That's not… His jaw tightened. That's not how I want this. She sat with that for a long time. How do you want this? She said finally. The question landed in the quiet between them and stayed there. His hands around his coffee cup were still. Everything about him was still. And she understood in that moment that the stillness was not indifference. It had never been indifference. It was the physical manifestation of a man exerting enormous control over something he was not willing to perform for an audience. Not even an audience of one. Not even her. Honestly, he said. Just the one word. She breathed. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Ryan Whitmore. She sent it to voicemail. It rang again immediately. She sent it again. A text came through. Evelyn, please pick up. It's about Vanessa. She looked up at Damian. He'd watched her face through all of it. Go ahead, he said. She called Ryan back. He picked up before the first ring finished. She went to the press, he said. He sounded wrecked. Not the tired she'd seen at the dinner, but genuinely unraveled. Vanessa. She gave a statement to the Tribune about Blackwood, about the investigation. She named you, Evelyn. She said you're complicit in… She what? Not a question. The words came out of her like something removed under pressure. It's going up on their site at 2 p.m. I just found out. I have a source at the paper. I called their legal department, but it's a public interest story, and they have… Send me exactly what you know, she said. Right now. Everything. She hung up and looked at Damian. He had heard enough from her half. His expression had gone somewhere very cold and very quiet. Vanessa went to the Tribune, she said. About you. About the investigation. She named me. 1 second of absolute stillness. Then Damian took out his phone and made a call that lasted 45 seconds, during which he said 4 sentences in a voice that was so completely controlled it was almost frightening. Not the volume, but the precision, the total absence of heat in something that should have been burning. He hung up. When? 2 p.m. He checked his watch. It was 11:53. We have 2 hours, he said. Before what? She leaned forward. Before what, Damian? If that story runs with my name in it, it won't. You can't stop a newspaper from… I'm not going to stop the newspaper. He stood. I'm going to give them a better story. What followed was the most functional and terrifying 2 hours of Evelyn Carter's professional life. Damian made calls. She made calls. They sat across from each other in the empty bar with their phones and their respective networks, and they worked, not as the arrangement, not as whatever complicated real thing was growing underneath the arrangement, but as two people who were good at their jobs and currently had the same problem. Damian had a press contact, not a plant, not someone he controlled, but a journalist named Sarah Chen at the Chicago Examiner who had been covering legitimate business accountability for 6 years, and who picked up when he called and listened without interruption. Evelyn called Dennis Haar and told him what was happening. He was silent for 3 seconds. Then, "Get ahead of it. Proactive transparency is stronger than reactive denial. If you have documentation of your good faith process, that's your story." She did. She had all of it. Every email, every confirmation, the timeline she'd built at her kitchen table the night before. She sent it to Dennis. Dennis called a contact. Things moved. At 12:40, Ryan called back. "Their legal counsel is reviewing something," he said. He sounded slightly less destroyed. "Someone submitted a competing documentation package. They're putting the story on hold pending—" "I know," Evelyn said. A pause. "How are you doing this?" "Working," she said, and hung up. At 1:15, Damian's phone rang. He looked at the screen and something changed in his face. Not the cold precision of the last hour and a half, but something older and harder. "Foss," he said. He answered it. She watched him listen. His hand around the phone tightened, just slightly, just enough for her to see the whitening at the knuckles, and then he said 3 words, "Don't move again," and he hung up. "What did he say?" she asked. That Vanessa's statement was his idea. Damian set the phone down on the table between them. That he fed her the information and suggested the approach. She wanted Damian gone from my circle, and Foss wanted me exposed, and they found a common interest. His jaw was working. He thought I'd be managing the press situation, and you'd be managing the exposure, and neither of us would have time to look at how the LLC got built. He was redirecting our attention. Yes. Well, what was he actually trying to accomplish? Damian looked at her steadily. There's a federal contract, Port Authority Logistics, South Side, worth approximately $40 million over 5 years. My holding company submitted a bid last month through legitimate channels. Foss has the competing bid. He paused. If I'm under federal investigation and publicly connected to an attorney with compromised filings, my bid is disqualified. She stared at him. This is about a government contract. Everything is about something smaller than it looks, he said. He set up the LLC through Teal, planted the exposure, then sent Vanessa to the press. All of it designed to knock me out of the bidding. His voice was even. And it almost worked. Almost. She picked up her phone. She called Dennis. The federal investigation, she said. Is it actually active or is it anticipated? Dennis paused. I made some calls this morning. The investigation is real but narrow. It's not targeting Blackwood specifically. It's a broad sweep of the Port Authority logistics sector. Anyone with a bid in that space is potentially relevant. So being named in the press as connected to a compromised attorney would be enough to flag his bid for additional review, which would likely result in disqualification even without formal charges. Dennis understood fast. Someone is clearing the field. Yes, Evelyn said. I'll call you back. She hung up and looked at Damian. We can prove this, she said. The LLC chain. If Teal was working for Foss, not for you, then the liability runs a different direction. And if we can establish that the Vanessa approach was coordinated, we don't have enough time to prove it before the bid deadline. Damian's voice was flat. The bid closes Friday. Today is Tuesday. Even if we build the full documentation package, it won't move through the right channels in 72 hours. Then we don't go through channels. He looked at her. Foss gave me information in that bar, she said. Her mind was moving fast now, the same way it moved during trial prep, during depositions, during every moment when the path forward was narrow and required precision rather than force. He was trying to scare me into walking away from you. He told me things that were mostly true because mostly true is more useful than lies when you're trying to manipulate someone. She leaned forward. He told me the investigation was 14 months in the making. He was specific about that. Yes. The LLC was registered 14 months ago. Yes. Foss set this up 14 months ago, before the Port Authority contract was even issued, which means he knew the contract was coming before the public announcement. She held Damian's gaze. That's insider information, federal procurement insider information. That's a separate crime from anything he's trying to pin on you, and it's documentable through the timeline alone. Damian was very still. You want to go after Foss directly, he said. I want to make him the story, she said. Instead of us. A long moment. The bar's quiet held them. That requires Sarah Chen to redirect her investigation, Damian said, in 72 hours. Does she want the actual story, or does she want the version Vanessa handed her? She wants the actual story. She always does. Then call her back. He called. Evelyn drafted. Dennis reviewed. They worked through the afternoon in the Ardmore with food that someone brought and went cold on the table and coffee that got replaced twice by a bartender who had clearly decided to simply accept that his bar had become a war room. At 4 p.m., Vanessa walked in. Evelyn saw her first. She came in through the front door in a charcoal coat and without the careful composure of the Donovan dinner or the River North Cafe. She came in with something stripped back, something that was either genuine distress or a very good performance of it. And Evelyn had spent enough time in rooms where those two things looked identical that she did not immediately rule out either. Damian looked up. He went still in the specific way that meant he was choosing how to respond rather than responding. Vanessa stopped at the edge of their booth. She looked at the table, the documents, the phones, the cold food, the two people who had been working together for the last 4 hours like a single organism. And something in her face did something complicated. I didn't know it was Foss, she said. Her voice was without its usual architecture. I need you to know that. He came to me with, he said it was public information, that the investigation was going to surface anyway, that you, she looked at Damian. He said you were going to hurt her. She gestured at Evelyn, that she was in danger being near you. And you believed him, Damian said. I wanted to believe him. She said it quietly and with enough self-awareness that it landed. I know what that means. I'm not pretending otherwise. Her eyes moved to Evelyn. The Tribune story, is it on hold? Evelyn said. A breath left Vanessa that had been waiting for a while. I'm sorry, she said to Evelyn specifically. Not to Damian, to her. You didn't deserve to be in the middle of this. You were never... She stopped. He used me to get at you, and I let him because I had reasons that weren't really about you, and I'm... She stopped again. I'm sorry. Evelyn looked at her. She had spent 4 years being adjacent to the kind of world where people used each other casually and called it business and felt essentially nothing about the collateral damage. And she had believed quite firmly that she was not part of that world. She was revising that assessment. Can you document what Foss told you? She said, when he came to you. What he said. How he framed it. Vanessa blinked. Yes. I have texts. He was thorough. He wanted me to feel like I had evidence. He is thorough, Evelyn said. That's the problem with thorough people. They leave records. She looked at Damian. That's another thread. Damian was looking at Evelyn with the expression she'd seen once before, at the Donovan dinner, briefly, before he'd handed her the champagne glass. The expression of a man who was seeing something he had not entirely anticipated. Vanessa, he said, without looking away from Evelyn. Send everything you have from Foss to Evelyn's email. Tonight. A pause. Okay, Vanessa said quietly. She left. The door swung shut behind her and the bar went back to its quiet, and Evelyn pulled the legal pad toward her and kept working. By Wednesday morning, they had a documentation package that Dennis called, with the understatement of a former federal prosecutor, compelling. By Wednesday afternoon, Sarah Chen had called back with questions that indicated she was reconstructing the actual story. By Thursday morning, the Tribune had quietly pulled the original draft in Sarah's piece, Procurement Fraud and Political Maneuvering, the real story behind the Port Authority bid, was in final edit. Foss called Damian at 10 a.m. Thursday. Damian let it go to voicemail. He played it on speaker for Evelyn, Foss's voice, the careful, precise voice of the man in the bar, now with something different underneath it. Not panic, close to panic. Blackwood. Let's be professional about this. There's a version of this where nobody has to... Damian deleted it. At noon Thursday, the bid deadline was extended 2 weeks by the Port Authority, pending a preliminary review of procurement irregularities flagged by a Congressional Oversight Office that Dennis knew through a contact that Evelyn had called on a hunch at 9 p.m. Tuesday. She hadn't told Damian she was making that call until after she'd made it. He had found out at 7 a.m. Thursday when his own counsel had called with the news. He had looked at her across the table. They were back in the penthouse by then, because there had been no time to go anywhere else, and it had simply stopped feeling like a decision. And he'd said, "You called Whitmore's oversight contact." "He owes me," she said. "He spent 4 years telling me he'd do anything for me, and then he married someone else. I decided to collect." Damian stared at her. "You used Ryan Whitmore," he said. "He had a useful connection," she said. "He was glad to help. I think it made him feel better about things." Another moment of that specific expression, the unanticipated thing. Then something she hadn't seen before. Damian Blackwood, in the full presence of another human being, laughed. Not a polite social sound. An actual laugh, brief and unguarded, that reached his eyes and then was gone, but had been real. She filed it. She almost smiled. Gerald Foss was served with a federal inquiry notice on Thursday afternoon. His bid was suspended pending investigation. A source at the Port Authority, who had been persuaded by someone Evelyn had never met and didn't ask about, confirmed that irregularities in the bid timeline pointed toward foreknowledge of the contract terms. It wasn't a conviction. It wasn't even close to a conviction. The law moved slowly and grinding and without drama, and Evelyn knew better than anyone that what had happened this week was the beginning of a long process, not the end of anything. But the story had changed. The target had shifted. Her name was no longer in any version of anything headed toward print. Thursday night, she sat in the penthouse with the city behind the windows and a glass of wine she'd poured and not drunk, and the particular exhaustion that follows 3 days of sustained maximum effort, the kind of tired that isn't just sleep deprivation, but the whole body depletion of using everything you have. Damian sat across from her. He also looked depleted, which on him was still somewhat intimidating, but the specific tension of the last 72 hours had released from his shoulders and his jaw and his hands, and what was left was something more honest than his public face. "It's not over," he said. "No. Foss will regroup. The investigation will still want to talk to you at some point. My bid may still be flagged." "I know. I want you to understand that He stopped. His hands were on his knees. "What you did this week, the way you worked, the call to Whitmore, the oversight contact, the documentation package, none of that was in the contract." "No," she said. "You didn't do it because of the contract." "No." He looked at her. She looked back. "Why?" he asked. It was the honest question. She'd been waiting for it, or something like it, since she'd stepped out of the elevator on Tuesday night and walked into the cold and started making decisions she couldn't attribute to any clause in any document. "Because someone tried to use me to hurt you," she said. "And I don't—" She stopped. Restarted. "I don't let people do that. To people I—" She caught herself. Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. "To people who matter." He was very still. "People who matter," he said. "Yes." The wine sat untouched between them. The city did its indifferent luminous thing beyond the glass. Somewhere in it, Ryan Whitmore was probably sitting with a woman he'd chosen for practical reasons and understanding, too late, the full cost of practicality. Somewhere in it, Gerald Foss was making phone calls and calculating what was salvageable. Somewhere in it, the machinery of law and consequence and time was moving at its glacial and inexorable pace. Damian stood up. He crossed the space between them, and he stood in front of her, and she tilted her face up to look at him. And the tiredness in his face was immense and real, and underneath it was everything he had been not saying since noon on Tuesday. Evelyn. Her name in his voice, at that register, with that weight. She stood up. They were close enough that she could feel the warmth off him, and her heart was doing something fast and not entirely comfortable in her chest, and she was tired in every cell of her body. And none of that mattered in the face of the look on his face right now. The look that was not controlled, not managed, not performed for any room or any audience or any arrangement. The look that was simply, completely him. "The contract ends in 3 weeks," he said. "I know." After that, "Damian." She said his name the same way he'd said hers. She watched something shift in his face. "Stop talking." He looked at her for one long second, and then Ryan Whitmore's name lit up her phone screen on the table beside them, and beneath it, in the preview text. "Evelyn. Vanessa left me tonight. She said she's been in love with someone else for months. I need to—" She didn't pick it up. She looked at Damian, and Damian looked at her, and the city blazed beyond the windows, and every thread of every lie, and every manipulation, and every practical decision, and every broken thing from the last 6 months was converging on this single point. This room, these two people. This moment that was either the end of everything or the beginning of the one thing neither of them had planned for. And Evelyn Carter, who had walked into a jazz bar with cold hands and a broken heart, and nothing left to lose, reached up and put her hand flat against Damian Blackwood's chest, over his heart, and felt it beating. Fast. Like hers. His heart was beating fast. She felt it under her palm. Not the composed, controlled Damian Blackwood that Chicago knew. Not the man who sat across negotiating tables and said 4 sentences and hung up phones and made problems disappear. Just a heartbeat, fast and real and human, knocking against her hand like it was trying to tell her something his voice hadn't gotten to yet. He covered her hand with his, not moving it, just keeping it there. They stood like that for a moment that had no useful length. Not long enough to be dramatic, not short enough to be accidental. The phone on the table had gone dark again. Ryan's message sat unread in the glow that had already faded, and neither of them looked at it. 3 weeks, Damian said. His voice was low, the real register, the one that cost him something. 3 weeks, she said. I don't want to spend them pretending the contract is the point. She looked up at him. The exhaustion in his face was total, and underneath it was the thing she'd been watching develop for 3 months the way you watch weather develop. Slowly, then all at once. Not softness, exactly. Damian Blackwood was not a soft man and was never going to be, and she didn't want him to be. It was something else. The specific look of a person who has decided, after a long time of not deciding, to be known. Then don't, she said. He leaned down and kissed her, and it was nothing like a performance. She stayed, not because she'd decided anything with finality. She was too tired and too precise a thinker for false finality, but because it was late and the city was cold and his hand was still covering hers. When the kiss ended and he rested his forehead against hers and exhaled, and that exhale contained more exhaustion and more relief than anything either of them had said in the past 72 hours, and she simply did not want to leave it. She fell asleep on the couch with her shoes off and a blanket that appeared at some point without her noticing. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Damian on the phone in the next room. The quiet, deliberate voice. 3 sentences. Hang up. And she lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling and taking inventory of herself. She was not panicking. That seemed significant. She was, in fact, more settled than she'd been in months, possibly years. The kind of settled that has nothing to do with safety and everything to do with having made a decision. Not a contract decision, not a strategic decision, but the kind that lives below strategy, in the part of a person that keeps making choices even when the conscious mind is busy arguing about them. She got up, found coffee. Damian appeared in the kitchen doorway and looked at her with the careful attention of a man who was not sure what he was going to find and was relieved by what he found. "Good morning," he said. "Don't make it weird," she said. Something at the corner of his mouth. Wouldn't dream of it. She drank her coffee. He drank his. The city was doing its morning thing beyond the windows, pale winter light off the lake. The kind of Chicago morning that was beautiful if you were inside it and brutal if you were standing in it. "I need to go to my office," she said. "I know. And I need to think about what this is, what we're doing. I know. I'm not going to be managed," she said. It came out more direct than she'd planned, and she let it stand anyway. "Whatever this is going forward, whatever we decide it is, I won't be handled. I won't be put somewhere safe and kept away from the difficult parts. I've been inside this from the beginning, and I stay inside it, or I don't stay at all." He looked at her with that full, unhurried attention. "That's not a negotiation," he said. "That's just who you are." "Yes," she said. "So make sure you want that before, Evelyn." Quiet. Absolute. "I know who you are." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. She went to her office. The next 3 weeks were not simple. Nothing about this was going to be simple. She'd understood that at a cellular level from the moment she'd put her hand on his chest and felt his heart beating fast. Because simple was not a thing that lived in the same neighborhood as Damian Blackwood's world. And she was in that world now, whether the contract said so or not. The federal inquiry into procurement irregularities moved forward.
Dennis Haar prepared a proactive cooperation packet for Evelyn and submitted it to the relevant office before they could come to her, which meant when they did come, a Thursday afternoon visit from two investigators with the specific demeanor of people doing a job rather than building a case. She was prepared, documented, and definitive. They sat in Dennis's conference room. She walked them through the filing timeline with the precision of someone who had been doing this kind of thing for 7 years and had nothing to hide and the records to prove it. The lead investigator, a woman named Torres, 50s, no wasted words, looked at the documentation and asked 2 questions that Evelyn answered directly. Then she closed her folder.
"You're a witness," Torres said, "not a subject." "I know," Evelyn said. "We may need you again as the Foss matter develops."
"I know that too." Torres looked at her for a moment, the specific look of a federal investigator who has interviewed enough people to recognize when one of them is genuinely clean. "Ms. Carter, how long have you been in legal aid?" 7 years. "Why?" It wasn't the question she'd expected. "Because someone has to be." Torres nodded once, capped her pen, and left. Dennis exhaled after they were gone. That went as well as it possibly could have.
"Yes," Evelyn said. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt the way you feel after surgery. Not better yet, but past the worst of it. Gerald Foss's situation deteriorated with the particular slow-motion devastation of someone whose own thoroughness had become the primary evidence against them. The timeline Evelyn had built on a yellow legal pad at her kitchen table. Marcus Teal's referral, the LLC registration, the Port Authority contract announcement, established definitively that Foss had structured the whole thing with foreknowledge of a federal procurement opportunity. Sarah Chen's piece ran the following Tuesday under a headline that was factual and devastating. It didn't fix everything. The law doesn't fix things. It processes them. Evelyn knew that better than anyone. Foss would have lawyers, and the lawyers would have arguments, and the whole machinery would grind for months or years before anything resolved into consequence. Marcus Teal cooperated. That helped. The documentation helped. But help was not the same as done. What was done was this. Evelyn's name was attached to the actual story, which was the story of the person who had untangled the scheme rather than the person who'd been used by it. Dennis called it the cleanest reversal of narrative he'd seen in 15 years of practice. She didn't argue with him. She just filed it. The contract expired on a Tuesday. She noticed it the way you notice a weather system passing, aware of it, oriented toward it, and then past it, and the sky on the other side was whatever the sky was. Damian noticed it too. He didn't make a ceremony of it. She'd half expected something, she wasn't sure what, some acknowledgement of the line being crossed. What happened instead was that he called her at 7 p.m. on Tuesday and said, "Are you still at the office?" "Yes." "I'm bringing food." "You don't have to." "I know." A pause. "Are you still at the office?" "Yes," she said again. He brought Thai food from a place in Wicker Park that she hadn't known existed, and they ate it at her desk surrounded by case files, and they talked about her current caseload, a custody case that was breaking her heart, a wage theft case that was going to trial in February. And he listened with the focused attention he brought to everything, and at some point she realized they were just 2 people eating dinner and talking about work, and the contract had been over for 6 hours, and nothing had changed except that it was over, and this was what was underneath it. "The arrangement worked," she said. He looked up from the container in his hands. "We set out to make them regret it," she said. "Ryan called me last week. He said losing me was the biggest mistake he's made. He said it 3 times now in 3 different registers." She picked up her chopsticks. "I don't think he's wrong, but I also don't think I care anymore." "No," Damian said. "Neither do I." He said it about Vanessa without needing to clarify. Just, neither do I. "So the arrangement worked," she said. "We got what we said we wanted." "Yes." "And yet." He looked at her steadily. "And yet." She looked back at him. "I need to ask you something." "Ask?" "The night at Ardmore." She set her chopsticks down. "When you proposed the contract, was any part of it, was I specifically chosen? The way Teal chose me for the LLC, were you?" "No." His voice was immediate and complete and did not leave room for ambiguity. "I walked into that bar because it was the bar I went to when I needed to not be seen as Damian Blackwood for an hour.
I sat down because you were the only other person in the room who looked like they were also trying to survive their own evening. His jaw moved. That's all. She held his gaze. Her internal evidence assessment machinery, 7 years of it, fine-tuned by depositions and court, and the specific education of watching people tell the truth and watching people not tell the truth, ran through it. I believe you, she said. I know, he said. That's why you asked out loud instead of just deciding. She was quiet for a moment. I'm going to need you to be patient with me, she said. With whatever this is. I move carefully. I'm not... She stopped. Tried again. I build things slowly. I check the foundations. I don't have a natural gift for trust, and I've been burned enough times that the mechanisms are... She made a small gesture. Slow. I know, he said. I'm not asking for fast. You might lose your patience. Evelyn? He said her name with the weight of someone putting something down that had been heavy. I spent 14 months with a woman who was always already thinking about where else she might go. I don't need fast. I need the direction to be real. She looked at him across her desk with its case files and its cold coffee rings and its 7 years of deliberate, unglamorous, necessary work. The direction is real, she said. He nodded once. Like that was enough. Like that was all he needed in that particular moment. They finished the Thai food and she went back to her case notes, and he sat across from her with a document of his own. And the night went by in that comfortable, functional silence of two people who have figured out how to be in the same space without requiring anything from it. She did not move into the penthouse. This was a decision she made consciously and explained to Melissa on a Saturday phone call that Melissa received with the equanimity of a woman who had been listening to Evelyn Carter explain her deliberate choices for 15 years. I need my own space, Evelyn said. I need the apartment and the plants and the specific way I've arranged things. I need to not lose myself in his gravity. His gravity, Melissa said. He's a very... She searched for the word. Dense person. There's a lot of pull. Is that a complaint? No. She looked at her window. Outside, the neighbor's tree was doing something bare and architectural against the winter sky. It's me being careful. Because if I'm not careful with myself, I lose the thing he actually wants, which is me, the actual me. Melissa was quiet for a moment. You sound different. Then what? Then when you called me the night Ryan pushed the ring across the table. A pause. You sound like yourself, but a version of yourself that isn't managing anything. Evelyn sat with that. I'm trying, she said. I know, Melissa said. You're also succeeding, just so you know. About 3 weeks after the contract ended, Damian asked her to come to the lakeside estate. Not for an event, not for appearances. He drove himself. She noticed this, that he drove his own car, no security detail, which she understood was a deliberate choice on his part, and she sat in the passenger seat watching Illinois flatten out toward the lake, and neither of them talked much, and that was fine. The estate was different in winter. She'd seen it once before, briefly, during a weekend when they'd been developing their public story, and she'd needed to understand where he came from. In winter, it was quieter and more honest-looking, the trees bare, the lake visible and gray and very large, the house itself substantial but not ostentatious in the way that some of Chicago's money expressed itself. He walked her around the property in the cold, and they could see their breath, and he showed her a place along the water where his father used to fish. He wasn't a good man, Damian said. He said it without particular inflection, not with the carefully managed neutrality that covered charged subjects, but with the flat honesty of something that had been processed a long time ago. I wasn't bad in any dramatic way, just absent, inside himself, angry at the situation he was in without having a clear idea of how to change it. What was the situation? Poor, he said simply. Irish Catholic neighborhood on the west side in the 80s. No useful connections, too proud to ask for help, and too stubborn to take a different path. He looked at the water. He left when I was 12. My mother worked 2 jobs. I decided at 14 that I would never be in a position where I had no options. And the path you chose to get there was not the one she would have wanted. His jaw was tight, not with defensiveness, but with honesty. I know that. I've always known that. I told myself for years that I was building toward something, that the means were transitional and the end was legitimate. The legitimate business, the holding company, the bid for the port contract. He paused. That was real. That was always the direction. But the path to get there is also real. I don't get to pretend otherwise. She stood beside him looking at the gray lake. I know what you are, she said. I went into this knowing what you are. I know you did. I'm not asking you to apologize for your history. I'm not apologizing. He turned to look at her. I'm explaining. There's a difference. I want you to have the full picture. Not because I need absolution, but because… He stopped. Because you're the only person in my adult life who has ever looked at me without wanting something from me first, and I don't want to give you less than the full picture. She looked at him. The wind off the lake was cold against her face, and her hands were in her coat pockets, and he was standing close enough that she could feel his warmth in the air between them. I want things from you, she said. What? Honesty, consistency, the willingness to let me be difficult when I'm difficult. She held his gaze. I'm not easy. I have opinions about everything, and I voice all of them, and I will argue with you when I think you're wrong, and I will be right, a statistically significant portion of the time. Something at the corner of his mouth. I've noticed. And I won't leave my work, not for this, not for… I'm not asking you to. You might need me somewhere and I'll be in a deposition. I understand how depositions work. Damian. Evelyn. He said her name like a period, patient, complete. I'm not asking you to be someone else. I don't want someone else. He looked at her with that full, unhurried attention that she had come to understand was the most intimate thing he offered anyone. I want the woman who drafted the contract in 3 days because she didn't trust anyone else to get the language right. I want the woman who built a timeline on a yellow legal pad at 2 a.m. because someone was trying to hurt something she cared about. I want the woman who called her ex-boyfriend to collect a favor without flinching and then went back to work. He paused. That's not a request for someone simple. She was quiet. The lake did its cold, enormous thing beyond the property line. I'm going to need you to tell me when things in your world shift in ways that affect me, she said. No more Marcus Teals. No more finding out from other people that my name is inside something I didn't know existed. Yes, he said. And if I ask you a direct question, I need a direct answer. Yes. Even when the answer is complicated. Especially then. She looked at him for a long moment. He held it the way he held everything, without performance, without managing the outcome, just present in it. Okay, she said. They walked back toward the house with their hands occasionally brushing and the cold coming off the lake, and the bare trees doing their winter thing, and it was not romantic in any performed sense. It was just two people walking in the cold who had decided, carefully and with full information, to be in the same direction. The resolution of the Gerald Foss matter took 7 months. Evelyn was not present for most of it. That was federal prosecutors and defense attorneys and the specific bureaucratic machinery of federal procurement law, and her role was as witness, which she performed twice in formal settings with the precision she brought to every formal setting. Foss's attorneys tried 3 different approaches to the documentation, all of which failed on the timeline she'd established that first night at her kitchen table. Marcus Teal's cooperation agreement was finalized in March. He received reduced charges in exchange for documentation of the LLC structure and its intended use. He did not look at Evelyn during the one proceeding where they were both present. She did not require him to. In April, Damian's holding company was cleared to participate in the Port Authority bid process. In June, the contract was awarded to a consortium that included his company as a minority partner. Not the full award, not the clean win, but a legitimate foothold in a legitimate process, which was exactly the kind of unglamorous partial victory that Evelyn understood from 7 years of legal aid to be what actual progress looked like. He called her when the award was announced. She was in a custody hearing antechamber with her phone on silent, and she saw the missed call in the text, "We got in," and she read it 3 times, then went back into the hearing, and after the hearing, she sat in her car and called him back and said, "Tell me." He told her. She listened to the whole thing. When he finished, there was a pause, and she said, "You built this from nothing." "Yes," he said. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to say it out loud." A pause. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I just wanted to say it."
Ryan Whitmore called her one more time in February on a Sunday morning when she was making eggs and had flour on her hands from a baking project that was not going well. She answered because she was tired of his calls going to voicemail, which she suspected he would eventually interpret as an invitation. "I'm engaged," he said. He sounded like he was preparing for a reaction. She put down her spatula. "Congratulations." She's a law clerk at Feldman and Associates. She's..." A pause. "She's not for money. I thought you should know that." "Ryan," she kept her voice even and without edge, "I genuinely wish you well. I hope you've learned the things you needed to learn, but I am not the measurement you use to evaluate your choices anymore." Silence on his end. He started. "Ryan," gently, firmly. "Goodbye." She hung up. She picked up her spatula. The eggs were slightly overdone but still edible, and she ate them at her kitchen table looking at the tree outside her neighbor's window, which was doing something hopeful in February. The first hint of something on the branches, too early to be sure of, but there. Damian texted at 9. "Sunday. Are you working?" She texted back. "Made terrible eggs. You?" A pause. Then, "I have better eggs. Come over." She smiled at her phone. She was aware of smiling, not performing the smile, just doing it, the involuntary physical expression of a specific feeling that she had not used often enough in the past several years. She went over. They had a conversation that mattered finally, on a Thursday night in May. It wasn't planned. Nothing important between them ever was. She'd noticed this about them, that the things they'd decided about each other had all happened in the margins of other moments, without announcement or ceremony. This one happened because she was at the penthouse, and it was raining, and she had a glass of wine, and he had whatever he drank when he wasn't performing, and they were in a comfortable silence that had been going on long enough to feel like its own language. "I want to tell you something," he said. She looked up from the book she wasn't entirely reading. "I had the LLC reviewed independently," he said, "before Teal, before any of this. 6 months before you filed those documents, I had a compliance audit on all entities within 2 steps of my holding company. The report came back clean." His voice was even. "I trusted the audit. I trusted Teal because he came with a referral from someone I trusted. The audit missed it because Teal hadn't built the structure yet. He built it after, once he knew the port contract was coming." He paused. "I want you to know that. Not as a defense, as a fact. I missed it. I should have had ongoing monitoring, not a one-time audit. That's a failure of my oversight, and I own it." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. "Because you asked me months ago whether I knew. And I told you I didn't, and that was true." He held her gaze. "But there's a version of not knowing that's also not looking hard enough, and I wanted to be honest about which one mine was." She was quiet for a long moment. The rain was doing something generous against the windows. "That's the most important thing you've said to me," she said. "More important than..." "Yes." She didn't need to hear the rest of the sentence. "Yes, because it's not you explaining yourself. It's you understanding what actually happened and being willing to say it out loud to me specifically." She set down her book. "That's not something most people do." "Most people aren't trying to be trusted by you," he said. She absorbed that. The rain, the wine, the specific quality of this room, this man, this evening. "I trust you," she said. She said it deliberately, not impulsively, not as a performance, but the way she signed important documents, with full knowledge of what she was agreeing to. "That's my position, informed and current." He looked at her with the full weight of whatever lived behind his eyes, the history, the hard choices, the things that had cost him, the surprising thing that was this. And he nodded once, slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. The rain continued. He asked her in September without lawyers or contracts or conditions. It was not dramatic. She would have been suspicious of dramatic. It happened in her apartment, not the penthouse. Her apartment, the one with the plants and the particular arrangement she'd maintained because she needed her own space. On a Saturday morning when she was in the kitchen with coffee and bad hair and the kind of face she only had when she wasn't performing anything for anyone. He'd stayed over. This had become a normal thing without anyone making a decision about it becoming a normal thing. He was sitting at her kitchen table with coffee of his own and the newspaper he still read in print because he was 41 and had opinions about paper. She was facing the window, and the morning was doing something with the light that it did occasionally in September, a kind of gold that didn't apologize for being beautiful. And she heard him set down the newspaper. She turned. He was looking at her with the look. The full one, the unhurried one, the one that was only ever her. "I don't have a speech," he said. "Good," she said. "I have a question." "Ask it." He stood up. He crossed this kitchen and stood in front of her the way he'd stood in the penthouse on a Thursday night in November with the city blazing behind him and both of them depleted down to the essential. And he was different now, she could see it. There was something less braced in him, something that had released over 9 months of careful, non-fast movement in a real direction. "Will you stay?" he asked. Not marry me. Not the formal phrase, not the legal language, nothing that sounded like a contract. Just, will you stay? Two people who had started with a contract knowing exactly where language like that had gotten them before, choosing something simpler and more honest. She looked at him. She thought about a ring box pushed across a restaurant table. She thought about amber light and a piano and a man who looked like he was also trying to survive his own evening. She thought about a margin note. Either party may terminate with 30 days written notice. No explanation required. And the thing it had said about him before she knew enough to read it clearly. She thought about her own heartbeat under his hand on a night in November when she'd put her palm against his chest and felt his. Fast. Like hers. "Yes," she said. He put his hands on her face, both of them, the way you'd hold something you'd been careful with, and kissed her in the September light of her kitchen with the coffee going cold behind them and the plants doing their quiet living on the windowsill and the city outside carrying on with its enormous indifferent business. They married in December, small and deliberate. Not a ceremony for Chicago's money, not the art institute, not the private clubs, not the rooms where image performed for other image. A judge, a civil ceremony. Dennis Haar as witness because he was the person who had sat across a table from both of them at different moments in the same crisis and understood what they were to each other before either of them had said it clearly. Melissa cried. She had told Evelyn beforehand that she would not cry and was lying to herself, and she cried, and Evelyn handed her a tissue without looking because she'd known and had brought one. Damian's man Thomas, the one who had been with him for 11 years, steady and reliable and utterly undemonstrative, shook his hand afterward with both hands, which was the equivalent, Evelyn had come to understand, of anyone else giving a speech. They ate dinner at a restaurant that wasn't the one where Ryan had pushed the ring across the table. She'd chosen the place specifically, a small Italian in Wicker Park with mismatched chairs and a wine list written in chalk and no pretension about anything. And they ate and talked, and Melissa and Dennis had a surprisingly contentious discussion about federal sentencing guidelines that Evelyn watched with the warm, slightly incredulous feeling of a person who has accidentally assembled a life that contains things she didn't know to want. Walking back to the car in the December cold, Damian took her hand. Not the small of the back gesture of their contract months. Her hand, interlinked with his, unperformed and unhurried. "I was thinking," she said. "When aren't you?" "About the lakeside estate." "What about it?" "In the summer. I'd like to go back, with more time. I didn't get to see the whole property." He looked at her sideways. "Are you already planning the summer?" "I plan things. It's a known quality." "It is." His hand tightened slightly around hers. "Summer works." They walked. The city was doing its winter thing, the lights and the cold and the particular beauty of Chicago in December, when the lake wind is brutal and the streets are bright, and the whole enormous machine of the place just keeps running regardless of any individual life happening inside it. She thought about the woman who had walked out of a restaurant in November with cold hands and her coat forgotten on the back of a chair, unable to identify what a person was supposed to do when the last 4 years of their life had been filed away under practical decisions. She thought about walking for 2 hours and ending up, not accidentally, in the amber light of a bar where a piano was doing something that pulled at the sore place under her sternum. She thought about the kind of loss that looks like the end, and turns out to be the removal of something that was taking up the space where the actual thing needed to go. "What are you thinking about?" Damian asked. "The contract," she said. He looked at her. The clause you added, she said, in the margin. The exit clause. He was quiet for a moment. What about it? I never used it. No. I could have, she said. Multiple times. There were multiple moments where using it would have been the rational choice. Yes, he said. I want you to know that I didn't fail to use it because I forgot it was there, or because I was too scared, or because I was already too in it to see clearly. She looked at him as they walked. I didn't use it because I didn't want to, the whole time. Even when things were complicated and the rational choice was separation, I didn't want to use it. He stopped walking. She stopped too. They were on a sidewalk in December in Chicago, with the cold air between them and the lights of the city doing what they always did. Impersonal and magnificent and indifferent. And he was looking at her with the expression that was entirely his and entirely hers. That clause, he said slowly. Yes. I added it because I wanted you to have a clean exit if you needed one. His voice was low. But I added it 3 days after you sent the draft. He paused. By which point I had already read your contract twice and was already... He stopped. A breath. I was already not hoping you'd use it. She looked at him. From the first week, he said. Which was not what I planned. No, she said. Neither of us planned this. No. That's the part that I keep returning to, she said. That it was real from very early, and neither of us acknowledged it because we'd both been hurt into being careful, he said. Yes. She looked at the sidewalk for a moment, then back up. I think that's the thing about the people who hurt us, Ryan and Vanessa. The thing they gave us that they didn't intend to give us. What? A reason to be careful, she said, with each other. To move slowly. To actually look at what we were building instead of just, she gestured, deciding it was love because it felt easy. He was quiet, looking at her with that full attention. Nothing about this was easy, he said. No, she said. That's my point. He reached out and straightened her scarf, slightly, just where it had slipped, and it was the most ordinary gesture and also somehow the most intimate thing, the way small acts of care from people who don't perform care always are. Come on, he said. It's cold. They walked. In the years that followed, the life they built was neither perfect nor simple, because they were not perfect or simple people, and they had decided very consciously not to pretend otherwise. Damian continued his move toward legitimate enterprise, not a conversion story, not a dramatic renunciation, but the slow, deliberate work of building something real enough to stand on its own without the infrastructure of his past, and the slow, deliberate shedding of the things that couldn't survive in daylight. It took longer than either of them had planned and cost more than either of them had expected, and there were nights when the weight of it was visible in the set of his shoulders, and she didn't fix it, just sat with him in it, because some things don't get fixed and don't need to. She made partner, not at Legal Aid, which didn't have partners, but at a small firm she joined 2 years after the wedding that did civil rights litigation and public interest law, and paid her slightly better than Legal Aid while doing the same essential work. She brought 3 of her legal aid cases with her. The custody case she'd been handling resolved in April, in favor of the mother, and she sat in the corridor outside the courtroom afterward and let herself feel it fully without managing any of it. Damian was waiting outside the building. She hadn't told him the outcome was today. She told him the hearing was today, weeks ago, and he had remembered and was there, standing on the sidewalk in the April light with coffee from the place on the corner, 2 cups, and the particular expression of a man who was there because he wanted to be there, not because he'd been asked. We won, she said. He handed her the coffee. I know, he said. You were going to. You don't know that. I know you, he said. She drank the coffee. The April air was doing something generous. Down the block, the custody case mother was coming out of the building with her daughter, who was 7 years old and had a backpack with a cartoon dog on it, and was holding her mother's hand with both of hers, and the mother looked up and caught Evelyn's eye, and did something with her face that had no useful word for it. Not just gratitude, but the specific expression of someone who has been given back something they thought was gone. Evelyn nodded once. The woman nodded back. Damian was watching her face. That's why, she said quietly. Not to him specifically, just said it, into the April air. That's why. I know, he said again. And he said it with complete and unhurried understanding,
because by this point, he did. They walked down the block together in the spring light, two people who had found each other in the specific wreckage of other people's practical decisions, and had built something neither of them had known to want, and the city moved around them the way it always had, enormous, indifferent, magnificent, and they were inside it together, which was, in the end, the only part that mattered.